Hello and welcome back to the studio. This week I come back and do part 2 of this little boat painting, the revision of it. I like the original, but well, I think the new version's got a little bit extra pizzazz. We'll also be looking at where that painting came from. There's an interesting connection between myself and another very famous YouTuber. And also you'll get a chance to see some of Terri's work. We'll even get to see a picture of Terri. Now, over to the studio. Let's get painting. So the first thing I want to address is the outline of my little rowboat. Now, this is my reference picture, and here is the original little transparency that I made on some greaseproof paper. And, well, it looks okay. But if you look more carefully, you see that actually I misdrew this. I didn't get this line right here. I didn't quite get this line right here either. The other thing I didn't do particularly well is I drew my little box. And it was a little bit rough and ready, wasn't it? You see, it didn't touch at some of the key points. It just about touched the edge of the box there. But look, this little line completely missed that little reference mark there. So here's the second version of this little transparency I made to isolate that shape. Notice that all the vital points touch the edges of my box. And even if there's a place where things don't touch, I make sure that my box is close enough to those little areas that I can actually sort of measure it and map it out properly when I come to draw it. And yes, I got the outline better this time. I'm hoping you can sort of see just, well, the differences here. Hold this above. You can see that I got this kind of flat here and I got this nice and round. And I got these sorts of angles nice, and so the little box is a bit tighter and a bit neater. In fact, overall, this is a far better tracing than this one. Even this line here was wrong. Oh well, so you see, take your time when you're doing these sort of isolations. Don't rush it. Make sure you draw a nice box too. Now, let's see how this translates to my painting. So, having worked out that the fundamental problem with this boat is that I drew it wrong, let's see if we can correct it. I'm going to zoom in on this area and see if we can actually rub this out. Remember, this has all been done in water-mixable oils, even done a few days ago. It's still just touch wet, so see if I can rub this off. So I've armed myself with a baby wipe and a cotton bud, a few of these to hand actually, and what I've found from experience is that if you actually squeeze out some of the moisture from the baby wipe onto the cotton bud, you can use these to erase water-mixable oils. Now, we've got quite a big patch here to do, so you might have to use the cotton bud itself, but as you see, it slowly lifts off the paint. Now, the other way I like to use this is you can just roll these around into a little sort of little point, and you can use that just to rub away the paint. And it's amazing just how much of this paint can be lifted right off. You get back down to the original pencil line, which was wrong. Now, sometimes you might find another little way to use this is actually to wrap this around the handle of a brush, and that's also quite useful. So let's put a couple of layers around the handle of this little brush and see if I can use that. As you see, you can get into slightly tighter areas. Now, I need to make this a lot rounder, so it needs to sort of be going to at least over here. So I'm going to lift this up, and this whole side here actually wants to be going slightly downhill. I'll bring the reference drawing up over there, the reference photograph rather, and we can have a quick look together. Now, it doesn't have to be out by much to really affect the look of my painting, but as you see, as soon as I start to remove all this paint that I don't need, and going a bit above the original pencil line, well, I think we're onto a bit of a winner. Now, mindful of the fact that I'm actually painting on paper, and it's not as tough as obviously a canvas, so you can really rub at a canvas. So I'm going to be a little bit more gentle here. I'm just going to literally rub away some of this surplus paint. I think that's going to give me the chance to repaint that entire section again. Incidentally, you have to give that a few minutes to dry because the moisture from this is still on the canvas. brushes to smudge in some colour. Now this has been sitting out for a couple of days, so you can see my paint is pretty dry already. So I don't have to dry it very much. I just have to get enough to create a nice smudge. And I'm going to darken up the area inside here. This wasn't really dark enough before. As you see, because the canvas is dried now, it takes paint very well. Of course, the other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at contrast, because that's the other thing that's missing from my painting. Is it's, well, just a little bit safe, isn't it? It's just sort of a bit bland. It doesn't have enough sort of intensity of colour. So I'm going to just drop in some of these little suggestions of some of these little stringers inside. I'm going to increase the intensity of colour all round with my painting. There, I think now you really see the little additional extra dark colour here. It really makes a big difference to my painting. You really get that sort of sense of depth now going into the centre of the little rowboat. Just adding a little bit more shading along here. These little ribs you can just about see. There. I think that's not far away from where I want it to be. Now, while I'm here, I'm also going to increase the intensity of that shadow along the bow here, because again it's just a little bit on the weak side, and it won't take much to really make that really stand out from the painting. And again, I'm just going to scrub in some Payne's grey, and even if it gets a little bit bigger than on the original painting, I don't mind that too much. I'd rather that it was bold, it really stands out. You can see what just adding that small amount of darkness has done to my painting. It's really lifted it. And the other thing about my painting is the whole side here is really far too pale. It needs to be a lot stronger, a lot darker. So again, I'm going to just use Payne's grey, and I'm going to just gently add that shadow, especially down on that bottom edge. They're really going to sort of knock back that brightness on my little rowboat. And I can increase the shadow also where the rowboat touches the beach, because that looks a little bit weak as well, especially sort of in this area. I think it's just a little bit darker here. Again, my paint's just a little bit, really a bit too tacky, but well, I think it actually works quite well on the beach, and it sort of gives the impression that there's a little bit of a choppy surface. Now, don't worry too much about these little grasses here. We can always put those back in. The next part of my painting I want to look at is the side of this boat here, and the detailing, or rather the lack of it. You see, dry brushing gets you some lovely effects, but this is much more textured, and I think the contrasts are stronger. The shadow on the side here, well, I can live with that, but this detailing in here really isn't quite right. And I've got my original wet palette back, and I've made up some more of this orange. Now these paints are getting a little bit dried out and a bit old and crusty, which is just about perfect. But rather than using a brush to apply, I'm actually going to use my palette knife. And as I say, I'm just going to use this knife just to sort of scrape on some of this detail. Not sure I like that colour, it looks a little bit violent. Let's tone that down a bit. I'm going to take some of, some of my blue-grey colours here. It makes a nice sort of greenish tone. I'm going to just drag some of that around on this boat as well. So I just want to give it a little bit more character, a little bit more colour. And I'm not too worried about the planking. If that disappears, we can always put that back. But sometimes using a palette knife really gets you that lovely extra detail that you need for your painting. And look at that. Gosh. Just a few strikes with the palette knife, tiniest amounts of paint, smashing little bits of detail. I'm going to go with a little bit of a light colour here. I think I'm just going to just put a little bit of light on the front of the little boat. Again, just get some of this sort of old peeling paint effect going on here. There we go. I just want my painting to have a little more character. You got tiny little rolls of paint. Anything you don't like, well, we scrape it off and repair it, can't you? I think I might just come in here and just put on a little bit more of a crusty effect on there. There we go. A little bit of a turquoise touch. Again, I'll carry on adding some more detail to the side of my little boat, and I'll come back in a few more little pops of blue colour in here, maybe a little touch of orange, maybe even a little bit of detail on the other side as well, and a bit down the front. So there's my little rowboat after a little bit more texturing and just using my palette knife, just going around defining a few edges, sharpening up a few details, so just adding a little bit more character to your painting. So you see, a palette knife can be really good fun to use if you just want to drag it around on your painting. I know not everyone gets on with palette knives, but sometimes, well, they have their uses. Bring my little reference picture up in the corner, you'll see that some of the sand here got a little bit more life in it, a bit more colour. And you can see that I've just sort of blended this in a bit. It's got a bit kind of mushy in. This happens sometimes when we just tend to overwork things a little bit too much. So I got a little bit of white, a tiny touch of ochre, and just a hint of Payne's grey just to dull it slightly. But it's still way brighter than the colour on my painting. And if you look at the reference, you see there's little pops of light in here. And it doesn't take much. You just have to literally just add in some little pops of light and just smudge those edges out. And see how that kind of lifts that part of my painting. And you can add these little touches of light to your painting and just kind of work them in with your finger. But don't overwork the paint too much, because it'll end up sinking into your painting and you'll lose that lovely, sharp, bright expression of colour. I'm going to carry on doing this to several other pages of my painting and give it that real extra sort of like bit of sort of a combination of contrast between lights and darks. So sit tight for the transformation. So in that last little sequence, you saw how I continued the theme of adding pops of highlight onto the beach to really kind of elevate the quality of my work. And just to kind of increase the intensity of those shadows, I started mixing up a little bit of a blue-grey colour here. This is the blue that I had on the side of my little rowboat, and I added a speck of Payne's Grey. I mean just a speck. It gives a sort of a blue-grey, maybe a greenish hint to it. And just, if you imagine the lights coming this way or coming from above, casting the little shadow there, that a lot of these little sort of dips in the ground or dips in the sand here, they need to have a little corresponding shadow to the back of them. But it doesn't need much. I've just spent literally a couple of minutes adding a bit of this blue-grey colour to the sort of left side of my painting here, again, just to sort of kind of close this off visually, to draw your eye back into that centre. Now, you'll find that sometimes it's not always the big features that make a big impression to our paintings. Sometimes it's these little touches of blue-greys here and there, little pops of light, little bursts of colour. I think I need to increase the colour on the front of the boat a little bit. So it's a balancing act, working backwards and forwards in your painting. Maybe adding a blade of grass. Sometimes the smallest thing can really make your painting sing. But first, I need to stand back and see this from the other side of the room. After standing back with a cup of tea in my hand for a good 10 minutes, I think I'm pretty pleased with the improvements I've made to my painting. I might just come in and tidy up one or two of these little grasses, and for that I'm going to use that same sort of gold and white colour we used on the beach, and my palette knife, get a little bit of paint on there, and you can just come back in and add in tiny little details with the edge of the palette knife. And again, this is the sort of thing that's very hard to do with a brush. Well, it's a bit thick, that one, never mind. We'll just work that one into the painting a little bit more. Just kind of rub that down. There we go. So I'm going to add in just a few little extra details here, a few little extra grasses, and with that, I think we'll be ready for a signature. Now, drum roll please, the premiere of Terri's painting. This was the version that Terri painted when she attended a class with Paul Clark. He's a fantastic watercolour artist and teacher, and she likes to go to classes with him over in East Sussex. This is the one she did in the classroom, but she came home and sat and did another one at the home studio. Something a little bit more considered, and that's this one. I think it's an absolute cracker. What a dainty, delicate beauty. Now, back to my version. So there's the finished version of my painting, and I'm really pleased with the way it came out. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget, you can always leave a comment down below, you can leave a thumbs up for me, and you can subscribe to the channel, because everything I make for you is for free. But if you want to drop a few pennies in my little coffee cup, that'd be much appreciated. It will pay for more materials for the next paintings. But don't move, there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. Happy painting, people.